What if dragons were vegan and elves were tech geniuses? Today we're going to be looking at weird fantasy or unconventional genres of fantasy, and we're going to be taking a look and each and every one of them, or as many as I personally know, and we're going to be breaking them down and possibly even giving you an example or two of books that align in that genre. So these types of unconventional genres, they don't just think outside the box; they make their own box. And the reason why a lot of these unconventional means of genre aren't mainstream is because a lot of people don't even know they exist. Which is the reason why I'm making this video. I want to let people know that these genres do in fact exist, and the books that they convey are quite excellent and do need to be read. I do highly suggest a lot of these unconventional type of genres. So here we have Arcane Punk. It's a subgenre of speculative fiction that blends fantasy elements with punk aesthetics and attitudes, often incorporating magic as a form of technology. It's characterized by a world where magic and technology coexist, sometimes replacing or augmenting each other, with a focus on how this combination impacts society, culture, and individual lives. And here's a more detailed look at Arcane Punk. So I'm not going to get super detailed into this. I'm just going to go over a few of the key characteristics. So magic is not just a mystical force in Arcane Punk, but it is used in everyday life, often replacing or augmenting technology like in steampunk. Similar to cyberpunk, it explores themes of social inequality, rebellion, and counterculture, but with a magical twist. Arcane Punk worlds can blend medieval fantasy elements with futuristic or industrial aesthetics, creating a unique and visually interesting settings. Just as punk culture embraces DIY aesthetics, Arcane Punk might feature characters creating their own magical devices or spells. While some Arcane Punk worlds might lean towards more dystopian view, exploring social stratification and the misuse of magic, others embrace a utopian vision where magic empowers individuals and fosters a better society. One example of Arcane Punk setting could be a city where magic is harnessed to power flying vehicles, illuminate buildings, and even create enchanted weapons, all while maintaining a rebellious punk-inspired culture. In essence, Arcane Punk takes the core principles of punk and applies them to a world where magic is a tangible and accessible force, leading to a unique blend of fantasy and technology with a rebellious spirit. So one of the books that are actually Arcane Punk and that is actually mainstream is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Not going to get too much into the Mistborn series and why it's Arcane Punk because I'm going to pretty soon be reading the third installment of that series, and I'm going to be reviewing the first, second, and third book all in one video. So that's going to be a future video. Now here we have the Weird West genre. It's a literary and media subgenre that blends the traditional Western setting with elements of fantasy, horror, science fiction, or other genres. It basically is a cross genre with Western with anything else. It essentially takes the familiar tropes of the Old West and adds supernatural or futuristic twists, creating a unique and often unsettling atmosphere. Weird West combines the core elements of Western, frontier setting, cowboys, horses, dusty towns, etc., with other genres. This can include magic, mythical creatures, robots, aliens, or other fantastical or science fiction concepts. Weird West often plays with or challenges the established Western narrative, sometimes questioning its inherent colonialism or focusing on marginalized characters. The genre often explores themes of wonder, longing, and the unknown, drawing the vastness and perceived wildness of the American West. Some examples are Bone Tomahawk, From Dusk Till Dawn, Westworld, Cowboys and Indians, those types of things. The Weird West provides a way to revisit the Western genre with a new and exciting twist. The genre allows for exploring themes of colonialism, prejudice, and other social issues in a very unique concept, I find. The combination of genres creates a sense of wonder and invites the audience to explore the unknown. So now we're going to get into Silkpunk. This is a subgenre of science fiction and fantasy that blends elements of both drawing inspiration from classical East Asian history, culture, and aesthetics. It shares similarities with steampunk, but diverges by using materials like silk, bamboo, and paper rather than the brass and steam of the Victorian era. Silkpunk also often explores themes of rebellion, resistance, and deconstruction of traditional power structures, while integrating biomimicry into its technological designs. Silkpunk aesthetic and world building are deeply rooted in its East Asian cultures, including China, Japan, and other Pacific Island nations. Instead of the metal and steam of steampunk, silkpunk utilizes natural materials like silk, bamboo, paper, feathers, and coral to construct its technologies. Often mimicking natural forms and functions, drawing inspiration from the biological world, such as airships that regulate lift like fish swim bladders. The punk aspect of Silkpunk involves a tendency to question, deconstruct, and rebel against established norms and power structures, often exploring themes of resistance and revolution. Silkpunk authors, often delve into the buried roots of tradition, seeking to rewrite narratives and decolonize perspectives. Some examples are Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty series, which is considered a foundational work of Silkpunk. It features airships, submarines, and other technologies built from organic materials and inspired mimicry. In essence, Silkpunk is a vibrant and imaginative subgenre that offers a fresh perspective on science fiction and fantasy by blending familiar elements of punk with rich and unique aesthetics of East Asian cultures. Now, with eco-fantasy, eco-fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy that explores the relationship between humanity and the natural world, often emphasizing the interconnectedness and codependence between them. It frequently features environmental themes, ecological systems, and the impact of human actions on the environment, sometimes incorporating magic to address these issues. It centers around ecological themes, exploring the natural world and its importance. A central theme is the relationship between humans and nature, often highlighting the consequences of human actions on the environment. The interconnectedness of eco-fantasy often emphasizes the of all things, showing how humans can impact not just the environment, but also other beings and ecosystems. These stories can depict either harmonious coexistence between humans and nature or a conflict arising from human actions that disrupt the natural order. It may use magic to explore environmental themes, such as how magic can be used to respond to natural disasters, or how it's intertwined with the environment. It can inspire new ways of thinking about a relationship with nature and encourage a more optimistic view of the nature. Some examples are The Lord of the Rings. While a classic fantasy, it also includes themes of nature's importance and the destructive of potential industrialization. Not a whole lot of people know that. So, often used interchangeably, eco-fantasy and eco-fiction, also known as cli-fi, have subtle differences. Eco-fiction tends to focus more on the realistic consequences of climate change and environmental degradation, while eco-fantasy incorporates fantastical elements, including magic and mythical creatures, to explore similar themes. Here we have Grimdark Fantasy, which people who enjoy Warhammer 40k will absolutely love this subgenre. This is a subgenre of speculative fiction, particularly fantasy and science fiction, characterized by its dark, violent, and morally ambiguous settings and characters. It often features dystopian elements, cynicism, and a focus on the darker aspects of human nature and conflict. The term Grimdark is inspired by the tagline of the tabletop game Warhammer 40,000. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, which is a quote in that tabletop. These settings are often bleak, violent, and unforgiving, with a focus on brutality and of war and conflict. Unlike traditional fantasy where heroes are clearly defined, Grimdark features characters with flawed morals and questionable motivations. There's a strong sense of realism where even protagonists may make questionable choices or act out of self-interest. Grimdark often incorporates dystopian elements, portraying societies that are corrupt, oppressive, or even broken. It often embraces a cynical, pessimistic worldview, challenging the traditional heroic narratives and highlighting the futility of good intentions. The tone is often bleak, with a focus on the harsh realities of life and the limitations of human agency. The grim darkness and focus on war, and in the Warhammer 40,000, have significantly influenced the dystopian or the development and popularity of the grimdark subgenre. An example of the grimdark literature is the first Law series by Joe Abercrombie. Known for its morally complex characters, brutal violence, and cynical portrayal of power and ambition. In essence, here, Grimdark is a subgenre that explores the darker side of fantasy and science fiction. It challenges traditional tropes and offering a more realistic and cynical portrayal of human nature and the worlds we inhabit. Weird fiction, cosmic horror, and Lovecraftian fantasy are related subgenres of horror and fantasy that emphasize the insignificance of humanity in the face of vast, incomprehensible cosmic forces and ancient, powerful beings. These genres explore themes of madness, forbidden knowledge, and the terrifying consequences of discovering truths beyond human comprehension. Here's a little breakdown of all of them for you. Weird fiction is a broader term encompassing stories that feature elements of horror, fantasy, and the supernatural, often with a focus of unsettling and the inexplicable. Lovecraft is a key feature in this, and his work helped define weird fiction. Cosmic horror is a subgenre of weird fiction and horror that emphasizes the insignificance of humanity in a vast, uncaring universe. And it often involves ancient, godlike beings like the great old ones and the psychological effect of encountering such entities. Lovecraftian fantasy and horror, named after H.P. Lovecraft, this subgenre uses his themes and concepts such as cosmic dread, forbidden knowledge, and the existence of powerful ancient beings beyond human comprehension. It also involves elements of science fiction, mythology, and exploration of the human psyche when confronted with the unimaginable. Some key characteristics that we actually have here are with cosmic horror and the insignificance. The universe is vast and indifferent to humanity's fate. Characters often stumble upon secrets or truths that drive them to madness. Gods and entities are forces beyond human understanding that can drive humans to despair. The focus is often on the mental and emotional toll of encountering the unknown, and the subgenres often blend elements of horror, fantasy, and science fiction, all three genres there. Many stories often explore the futility of human existence in the face of cosmic indifference. Some examples with authors here. One is obviously H.P. Lovecraft with his Call of Cthulhu, The Dunwich Horror, and at the Mountains of Madness. Some other authors are Algernon Blackwood, Arthur Machen, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, and writers associated with the magazine Weird Tales. Some examples are Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, The Fisherman by John Langan, and The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavelle. Here we have one called magical realism, which combines elements of fantasy with the supernatural. It presents the magical as ordinary and integrated into everyday life, often without explanation or explicit acknowledgement. This genre is frequently associated with Latin American literature, particularly from the mid 20th century, but has influenced writers globally. The stories are typically grounded in a recognizable reality, often with historical or social context. The supernatural, fantastical events, characters, or objects are introduced into the narratives as if they were normal occurrences. These magical elements are presented without surprise or explanation, often blurring the line between real and the unreal. The fantastical elements often serve as metaphors or symbols for deeper or social, political, or psychological issues. Many works, particularly those from Latin America, incorporate folklore, mythology, and cultural beliefs into their narratives. Now, the one example is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This iconic novel blends the history of a family with fantastical elements, or such as levitating priests and rains of yellow flowers. While both genres feature magical elements, magical realism places more emphasis on the realistic world and the impact of the magical on everyday life. Magical realism typically avoids explaining the magical elements, while fantasy often provides a framework or system for its magic. Fantasy often takes place in entirely fictional worlds, while magical realism is rooted in the real world with magical intrusions. In essence, magical realism is a genre that challenges our perceptions of reality by seamlessly blending the ordinary with the extraordinary, creating unique and thought-provoking reading experience. So I'm not going to get super deep into this one, which is low fantasy. It's also known as intrusion fantasy. It's a subgenre of fantasy where magical or supernatural elements intrude upon the real world. Unlike high fantasy, which takes place in entirely fictional worlds, low fantasy is a set of the familiar, often modern setting. The magical elements in low fantasy are usually more subtle and less pervasive, making the extraordinary stand out against the mundane backdrop of everyday life. Low fantasy stories are typically set in the real world or a world closely resembling it anyway, whereas high fantasy worlds are entirely fictional and self-contained. Magic in low fantasy is often introduced as a new or unexpected element rather than being a fundamental part of the world structure. It often focuses on how the introduction of magical affects ordinary people and their lives, exploring the conflict between the mundane and the magical. Books like The Chronicles of Narnia, where the children enter a magical world through the wardrobe, or Harry Potter, where magic exists alongside the mundane world, are often cited as examples of low fantasy. In essence, low fantasy explores the idea of what if magic suddenly appeared in our world, and how would it affect our everyday lives. So another subgenre that I'm not going to get too deep on because I don't know a whole lot about it, I just know a little bit, is, and I'm basically, you're going to see me look at my notes a lot for this one, is the fantasy of manners. A subgenre of fantasy literature that also partake in the nature of a comedy of manners, though it's not necessarily always humorous. Such works generally take place in urban settings and within the confines of a fairly elaborate and almost always hierarchical, I can never pronounce this word, hierarchical social structure. I know I butchered that word, I always do, I apologize. But I mean, I don't necessarily read this genre a whole lot, but one book that I have on my to be read list is An Empath's Lure. So check that out. I know it's a fantasy of manners genre book. So if you want to know what it is, check that out. I plan on checking it out and giving it a read and seeing exactly what this genre does entail. This one is one of my favorites. It's dark fantasy. And it's going to be basically what my book, Rift of the Damned Mouse of Malgrath, is based on dark fantasy and cosmic horror. But dark fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy that incorporates darker, more disturbing, and frightening elements often associated with horror. It blends traditional fantasy settings and tropes with a more sinister tone, sometimes featuring terrifying monsters, morally great characters, and bleak or morally ambiguous worlds. Dark fantasy often incorporates elements of horror, like I've already stated, such as gruesome descriptions, suspenseful situations, and supernatural threats. Characters in this genre are often morally gray, with anti heroes and flawed protagonists being the most common. Settings of in dark fantasy are often grim, foreboding, and unsettling, contributing to the overall dark atmosphere. It frequently explores mature themes such as mortality, the corrupting nature of power, and the darker aspects of human nature, while incorporating horror. It still retains the core. It still retains fantasy in its core, and elements like magic, mythical creatures, and fantastical realms. It may deconstruct traditional fantasy tropes, exploring the darker implications of magic, creatures, and societal structures. The Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski is actually an example of dark fantasy. The Black Company by Glenn Cook, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, though some would argue that that one does lean more towards grimdark. Pan's Labyrinth, The Shape of the Water, which blends romance with dark fantasy elements. But while sharing similarities with horror, dark fantasy tends to maintain a stronger focus on fantastical elements and world building, even with the darker theories, or darker themes, sorry. Horror often focuses on illicit fear and dread, while dark fantasy may explore deeper themes and character development. So a lot of these genres can actually be, a lot of these unconventional subgenres can actually be cut like its own type of genre if you look at how big it's become, such as dark fantasy. That genre is actually quite huge now. It's probably the most common. Other than high fantasy, it's the most common subgenre of fantasy out there. It's the one you'll find the most amount of books in. Grimdark is another one. It's absolutely huge. Arcane Punk, it's not as big, but it's very, very enjoyable. I do suggest you reach out there. Silkpunk, I've more, in eco fantasy, I've more learned about when I was in university. I haven't actually read a whole lot of books, any books in those subgenres, although I do plan to and review them here on this channel. So if any of you authors out there do have a book in one of these subgenres, do reach out to me. I'd love to give it a read and review it on this channel. If you people have who are out there watching have read some of these books and some of these unconventional subgenres, comment on it. Let me know what you thought about the book and if you would recommend it or not. But yeah, that's about it. So hit like, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and comment on some of the books that you've read that fit into these unconventional subgenres. And I will reply to every single comment. I've been relatively busy. Work has me working very long hours. So I'm not going to edit this video a whole heck of a lot, so you might not see some of my quirky memes in there or GIFs in there. But yeah, give a comment on my video, and I'll reply to every single comment, and I'll catch you on the next one.